Hello, everyone. This is Brian Lewis of the Spin Zone talking about this episode's about Arsenal. So, if I'm Arsenal FC right now, you have the Cronkies. Arsenal have been kind of through a really interesting growth over the last couple of years. In a lot of ways, it's been kind of the slowest regrowth, if you will, of all the teams in the Premier League. You had Aston Villa and Newcastle that kind of ascended the same way that Leicester did in a way. Um, and then you obviously have Tottenham that went to the Champions League final. Chelsea have been have fallen off, but they got their rise. Now they're in second. Liverpool obviously are now favorites to win the Premier League. Manchester City have been dominant. So like, where does Arsenal fit into this Premier League circle over the last couple of years? And I think under Edu Gaspar, he's hired Mikel Arteta. They brought in Odegaard. They brought in Gabriel Jesus, Partey, Declan Rice, Gabriel and Saliba, which I think is one of the best center back duos on the entire planet. I like Tamayasu a lot. David Raya and Ramsdale, I think, are both quality goalies. And even though they had Matt Turner, they were able to, make a quick buck off of Matt Turner there going to Nottingham Forest. And this Arsenal team is really close. Now, with Edu deciding to step away, with him stepping away now, there's a position of sporting director that needs to be filled. Now, a couple of names that have been out there have been mentioned. And of course, I mentioned Dan Ashworth, who stepped down from Manchester United, and I'll get into that whole surplus in a second. And then Roberto Olabe from Real Sociedad. Now, between those two, you're almost looking at the resume of Ashworth and going, Ashworth has a way better resume than Olabe. But then you look at what Olabe's done at Sociedad, and that whole roster is basically been together for 5-6 years. Ramiro, Kubo, Moreno before they let him go, Zubermendi, Oyarzabal, even they had Isaac for a couple of years. They've had a lot of guys on that team that have been there for a long time. And Sociedad, they're playing in the middle of the Basque region of Spain, so towards north of Madrid, south of Bilbao, kind of southeast of Bilbao, if you will. Antoine Griezmann played for Real Sociedad at one point. Just, throwing names out there. Incredible player Griezmann is. The growth that he's had as a player. But overall, looking at Arsenal, Olabe's squad depth, and keep in mind, Arteta prefers Olabe as the candidate, and this was reported in November. If you look at the analysis of, my I have an article coming out with the top flight. So when that comes out, there's an article in there from a website that I basically got a lot of the data from, and a lot of and the growth of that roster and how long that they've been there. Zubimendi and others have been there since teenagers. A lot of those guys came from their youth system, their Sociedad B roster, and some of them were big transfers like Kubo. And there's a lot that goes into the squad building, very similar to what Brighton have had a lot of success with in the Premier League, which is developing players, selling them for big fees. But Sociedad like to be able to build guys and keep them and build with success. And obviously, they're a team that's in between that like Europa League and Champions League cusp, if you will. So between all of that, I think there's a lot of direction of where Arsenal wants to go. And now keep in mind, Arteta being a Spanish manager, you look at the fact that 4 Sociedad players were on the Spanish national team. There's a chance that maybe you can get 2 of those 4 guys on, well, obviously not Moreno, but there's a chance that you could get, Zubimendi and Oyarzabal, for example. And those players could be very crucial for Arsenal down the line. So I think that's something to be said also. Now, Ashworth's resume between West Brom with Michael Garlick, who's now the managing director. Garlick, I think, has a connection with Ashworth. There's a big admiration there. Now, keep in mind, West Brom in the 3 years that those two worked together. 11th in 2010, 11, 10th in 2011, 12, and then 2012, 13, they finished 8th, which I think is the highest finish West Brom ever had in the Premier League or in the first division in their history. So with that being said, there's a big admiration for how Ashworth does the job. And of course, Newcastle, he leaves Newcastle, and then Ashworth, they're struggling. Which it seems as if Ashworth, every club that he's left, has struggled after he left. So, I mean, that could be the pure reason his resume is better. However, I think if Arteta is, now I think Arsenal have to ask themselves the philosophical question. of, is Mikel Arteta the right man to lead them going forward? And I think if that answer is yes, then I think if you're the Cronkies, especially Michael Kroenke, it seems like his son has more in tune with the soccer or the football side of things. Then you got to hire Roberto Olabe, and you got to make that happen immediately. Now, if Kroenke's going to go, well, Mikel's great, but I'm also not really sure if I'm going to commit to him long term. I want to see how he does this season and next season, and I want to get to a top 2 finish, a top 1 finish. Like, I want to win the Premier League. And if he's not the right coach for that, then Arsenal got to put themselves in position to get the manager that can do that. However, and that's really the philosophical question. Now, I think for Arsenal, considering where they were after Emery was let go, I don't know how you can look at Arteta and say that you can't stick with him. I think continuity is something that can be built. And obviously, you look at Brighton. Brighton have had manager after manager after manager after manager after manager, sure. But I mean, who would Arsenal even want at that point? Now, Ashworth has a good history of hiring managers. He hired Eddie Howe at Newcastle. So that's just one fascination, right? And obviously, there's a couple of managers in that lower cusp that have had a lot of success. Look at what Nuno Espirito Santo's done in Nottingham Forest. The right manager can turn a team around very quickly. I mean, Steve Cooper, good manager, got Nottingham Forest up to promotion. But Nuno Espirito Santo's taken pretty much that same group of guys and taken them to the next level. And obviously, maybe next season, if they have European football, like his Wolves teams that played a lot of games, they might wear down with the style he plays. But the success right away is what these teams want, because that's what's going to pay dividends, especially for a team like Forest that were facing FFP. That's huge. And I think for Arsenal, being able to navigate the next step, because Arteta is already moving away from Gabriel Jesus. There's a lot of uncertainty with Thomas Partey. There's, obviously questions to do with their defense, especially at left back with Kieran Tierney, if Tierney decides to leave. So with some uncertainty on and some holes in this Arsenal roster, they need a sporting director that's going to be able to patch those holes. Now, that really depends on the way Arsenal want to go. And I think direction-wise, if I had to pick between Ashworth and Olabe, resume-wise, it's Ashworth. But I think for Arsenal, Olabe is by far the better fit, just based on everything with Arteta. And if you're able to get Zubimendi, and that common link alone is what gets Zubimendi through the door for Arsenal. And of course, on top of that, like, you're able to get a left back. I think that's huge for them, and I think that's something that they need to consider. And if I'm Arsenal, then they gotta make their they gotta get Theo Hernandez to the door, because apparently if Theo Hernandez is available, Theo Hernandez has got to get to the door.